Hey there friends, welcome back to another Legally Armed America video. I'm of course Paul Glasgow here, the one and only truth pimp. There is no other. Dealing you a vulgar display of logic and reason on a daily basis. Yes, that's right, daily. I put out a video daily, so if you happen to miss them or you don't get a notification, check that subscription, check that bell. More than likely YouTube has pulled you out. They tend to cull my subscriber list a little bit, so make sure you're still subscribed whenever you tune into the videos or go hunt for them. If you haven't seen that I put one out, go hunt and see. Look and see, because you've probably been pulled off the list. Guys, today we're going to learn something. Now, I know a lot of you are probably already tuning out. Today's video, like some, will ruffle some feathers. I'm okay with that. Truth. That's what we're dealing here. If you cannot handle the truth, that is your problem. That's not mine. I'm simply going out there foraging for the truth, harvesting it, and dealing it, and serving it to everybody out there. This one is going to be based on some trends, right? There's a guy, David Rosado. He's a research scientist that I follow on X, interested in underexplored research topics, institutional dynamics, and AI bias. Pretty good find. Go follow him if you get a chance. He pinned a post that he had put out last year. And I've seen it before, but I wanted to go and break it down because I feel like this is a super interesting set of trends and charts here that he pulled by collecting all this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these in no necessary order, just as the conversation flows, so that we can talk about them, because I think it's pretty eye-opening what affects the trends on this chart and timeline. Now, the trends that his charts actually represent is mentions of prejudice in academic papers. Now, academia is colleges, universities. It's the professors. It's what they're dealing, the information they're putting out, how they're framing that information. And that's really important, because I think we all know that you can take a set of data, information, and you can put your own spin on it. And it can go this way or it can go that way. You're not necessarily putting the truth out. If you put a spin on it, that either eliminates some other truths or you embellish a little bit. And I think that's what's happening, because, I mean, look at our youth of today. A lot of young people are stupid, and they parrot and jibber jabber the same stuff. So you often wonder, are they getting this from a playbook? Well, they kind of are, from academia. This first prejudice from college professors that I wanted to point out, look at the years on the bottom. I'm going to explain a little bit about the chart on this particular chart, but I won't do it on all the other ones because you're already going to know how they work. That's the timeline on the bottom. Obviously, that's years. 1900 to the year 2024 is where this chart runs to. Actually, October of 2024 is where it ends. And it takes each one of these topics and shows how professors have biases on campus across the board regarding these particular topics. This one again being anti-Semitism. Now, if professors are preaching that Jewish people are being discriminated against, that's what this would represent. Look at my first little circle down to the bottom left-hand corner. What do you think that is? Look at the time frame. Well, that's going to be about that time where they call it the Holocaust, right? So that's representing when the Holocaust was discovered, and you see the immediate spike. And I guess you could say that would be in Jewish sympathy. That's why they spike. And each one of these would be based on sympathy on all these charts for that particular frame of whether it's race, ethnicity, or religion. And you can see the second red circle that I put, roughly 1949, 1950, where it drops sharply. I think we can safely say that probably coincides with people being upset with the installation of the Israeli state over in the Middle East, right? That was in 1948, 1949. And you see it drops off sharply and somewhat stays down low between, I don't know, let's just say 1.5 to 2.0 in that area all the way through to 2024. So those are the two big things that likely happened on the timeline: Holocaust and the declaration of the Israeli state in the Middle East. Moving on to our next one, sexism. This one's pretty interesting. If you look right there, it's kind of a flat line. You've got a couple of little bumps right there. And then all of a sudden, roughly in that late 60s time, mid 60s, you see a spike and it goes up considerably. That's roughly coinciding with the Title VII Civil Rights Act of 1964. While this may have had other effects in other areas, it certainly had a massive impact on prohibiting discrimination based on sex in the workforce. This was going to be spread across hiring, firing, pay practices, all of that. This opened the door for a lot of women and emboldened a lot of women because it gave them what they felt like equal footing in the workplace. And that was kind of big because at that point, I think it was, everybody kind of knew women were at a disadvantage. Everything from pay to probably even hiring practices like we don't want a woman working here. Now you notice kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, it started to drop. In other words, professors started to feel, let's just say, less sympathetic for women, mainly because women came in so strong. You see that massive spike starting in the late 60s. That was a huge spike. I mean, it literally more than doubled, almost tripled in that amount of time, based on professors having sympathy towards women. Well, obviously, a lot of women not only came into the workforce, but also, I would say a good 40% of the numbers I've read of females went into professorship. So they were actually part of these teachers there. So they saw with their own eyes and with their own actions that clearly women were being accepted more and treated a lot more equally. So that sympathy started to drop a little bit. Notice that really decent spike over there probably in the early 2000s. That's going to be the beginning, 2006 roughly, of the Me Too movement. Now I fully support the original intent of the original movement, this early Me Too movement in 2006, because it sought to make sure that women's voices were heard who were sexually discriminated against or discriminated against somehow, but usually in sexual type situations. Where those situations might have normally been brushed under the carpet, now they were being brought to light. The problem was people hijacked that movement, and it got to a point where people were, let's just say, putting out false accusations because everybody would believe them. There was a high-profile lawsuits that took place. A lot of things, Duke Lacrosse, look at that. I mean, all of this had a lot to do with believe no matter what if somebody speaks up. And that's a delicate area because you want women who truly were abused sexually or whichever to come forward. You don't want them to be shamed. You don't want them to feel like they don't have a voice when it comes to that. Problem was, just like anything else, other people hijack that movement and it becomes fake in some areas. Not all areas, but there's a portion of it, a percentage of it that becomes fake. And that's what happened to this movement. But these professors really liked it because it was a sexy movement, if you will, especially on college campuses. So it gave these feminists, these blue-haired fat chicks, a reason to go out there and go, believe me, and believe me, there was nobody abusing these people. But it's one of those things where that really allowed that late spike with the sympathy for women in this case. Moving on to racism. Okay, college professors have shown a like starting roughly late 60s. You see that big spike. What do you think that one historic event was that made that spike in, say, 68, 69-ish? Well, of course, that's going to be Martin Luther King's assassination. You can see that there was a massive spike during that time. It did level out a little bit after 1976, but did continue to trend upward at a relatively even pace. But certainly the Martin Luther King assassination sparked that whole rise, because before that it stayed somewhat low down there in those lower numbers. Now look at this late spike, big spike late. What do you think that was? That was the St. George of the fentanyl riots. Massive and immediate spike, because the professors on these campuses saw the new trendy thing to latch onto, and instead of waiting for the details to come out, I'm not saying both sides didn't do something wrong, because both sides did do something wrong, but instead of waiting to see, they jumped to conclusions and immediately assumed that St. George was in fact a saint, and he was not. Again, two wrongs don't make a right. I'm just telling you both sides of the story. But that's why you had that immediate spike. Race has always been something really sexy and popular to make a, let's just say, a hot topic on campuses. And the professors did not waste any time making this front of mind on campus. Moving on to homophobia. See that little blip down there in the late 60s? That would be the Stonewall riots. If you hadn't read about the Stonewall riots, it's very, very interesting. It's essentially an uprising, they called it in some cases, It began in the early hours of June 28th of 1969 when New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay club located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The raid sparked a riot among bar patrons and neighborhood residents as police roughly hauled employees and patrons out of the bar. There was a full 6 days of protest and violent clashes with law enforcement. And as you can see on this chart right here, a lot of times, just like the Martin Luther King assassination, when you have tragic events that happen that are very high profile, there's usually not a slow upturn on these charts. Usually these professors jump right on those things because they're hot topics. Again, it's a national tragedy when you have this type of a riot that's being subdued by law enforcement. Obviously, it was all over the media. Now notice this bump right here in the late 70s. That's whenever Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay politician to be elected, he was assassinated in 1978. That's why you have this later spike in about 1978-ish. Now if you notice right after that, you have this pretty constant incline going up. Before that, it was relatively flat with a couple of peaks and valleys. But after that, it moved up. It just continued to go up. And a lot of that had to do with the, I guess, discovery of and administration of different types of medication and whatnot for HIV and AIDS. So that was a hot topic thing. And of course, you know, on these campuses, and I'm not trying to be funny here, a lot of gay people on college campuses. So that's why you had these professors started to realize this is a really front of mind topic with the HIV and the AIDS thing, knowing that they had a pretty captive audience with a bunch of gay people. I'm not saying all gay people, I'm just saying a lot of gay people on campuses. This was something definitely front of mind that you could push up there and say this is a hot topic for them. That's why you saw them talking about it so much. And I'm sure a bunch of them were gay too. Now look at this next bump. This is roughly mid-90s. That's the don't ask, don't tell policy of the military. Bill Clinton put that into effect. Before that, you were not going to go into the military. You weren't going to be accepted if you knowingly were gay. And that was taken away. And that made the, let's just say, the topic a very big topic, because up to that point, historically, the military was not going to let you in. That was kind of a big deal whenever this went into effect. That's why campuses talked about it so much. Now, there is an opposing side to that, of course. The military numbers started to suffer as a result of that. If you look at this chart right here, you see this sharp decline at first. Well, that's the Gulf War. Obviously, people did not want to go to war. They didn't mind enlisting before when we were not in a war where we put boots on the ground, but obviously that affected a lot of morale as far as people enlisting into the military. But look at this, it flattens out right at the end of the Gulf War. Look at this circle that I put right here. That's when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was implemented. And as you can see, pretty sharp decline after that from people not wanting to enlist into the military because, hey, they did not want to be in foxholes with gay people. That's their words, not mine. That was a very resounding theme back then. Now the next one I'm going to go to is Islamophobia. This one can get a little complicated and it's going to be a little bit long-winded. There's a lot of moving parts to this. You know, you have a lot of, I know a lot of people don't understand, or at least at a high level, the differences in Islam and Christianity and other religions out there. There's massive differences, and there's a lot of hate involved on both sides. So it's a very complicated issue, but it's a very deliberate one as far as Islam goes when it comes to infiltrating the United States and any Western country for that matter, or any Christian country, I should say. They're butchering people by the hundreds, thousands down in Nigeria. Now, we talked earlier about this sharp decline in anti-Semitism's sympathy on campus, and we attributed that to the Israeli state being implemented in the Middle East. Well, if you go to the Islamophobia, you see that same time frame, there's a spike. So there was a drop in the anti-Semitism and a rise in the Islamophobia sympathy on campuses. I think that's a correlation. I'm pretty sure they each went in opposite directions, right? But look over here in the early 2000s. You know what that was. Obviously, that first bump right there is going to be after everybody got over the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. At first, it was like a big kumbaya. Then after that, people started, after word came out about Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other stuff. Again, I'm not going to get into the 9/11 stuff, but there was a sharp increase, and you have to understand we had a lot of Muslim students and a lot of Muslim professors already on campus in the United States. Then they started getting pissed off and they started speaking out, and you started having a constant rise in sympathy for Islam on campus. That's why you see that steady increase right there. Then you see this next bump where I have circled right here. You know what that was? Barack Obama being elected. Yes, you can say what you want. Barack Obama was super sympathetic. You can say he was Islamic or not, but he was very much sympathetic to Islam, way more than he was to Christianity. In fact, Obama's first major speech to the world was in Egypt, and it was very apologetic about America and very pro-Islam. You'll also remember that the Muslim terrorist that shot up Fort Hood was actually declared workplace violence instead of terrorism by the one and only Barack Obama, because he did not want his preferred religion to have a stain on it. So he would not call it terrorism, even though it clearly was. Everybody knew that. Obama knew it was. He was just trying to keep it from getting a black eye. But notice there's a super sharp increase about 2012. I mean, it skyrocketed after that. What was that? That was where Obama blamed a video on Benghazi when my friend Chris Peranto had to fight off radical Muslims all night long because Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama would not send any help to them in Benghazi, Libya. They blamed it on a YouTube video. We all knew better, but that's what they blamed it on. Clearly, at that point, the Muslim students on campus and the Muslim professors on campus were very much emboldened. Very, very much. Because they had, the President of the United States was not even kind of on their side. He was in their corner. Christianity's over there. Obama's right here in the corner of Islam. So they knew that. So they had all this freedom to speak and, of course, grow their influence in the United States. And they were happy to do that because that's what their goal is in radical Islam. So the Islamic one is very complicated. There's so many moving parts to that. We could do video upon video just on that alone. So I'm not going to bore you with too many more details on that. But I wanted you to know, for the most part, why those peaks and valleys existed like they do. Now, I saved not the best for last, please. But I saved the newest trend. The newest thing that professors are climbing on board. The new thing that they see is the shiny new thing that now I can get sympathy for, even though it is less than 1%, less than 0.5% of the U.S. population, but it's growing because it's trendy. Transphobia. Not much of an increase till roughly 2010-ish, and we start seeing a massive spike. A lot of this too, remember, you're seeing the implementation of media. You're seeing iPads, you're seeing the internet. All of that stuff is developing along this timeline also. So when you see this massive spike, understand that that's the Facebook culture. When you see this sharp of a spike, that's not reminiscent of something that's really happening, an actual movement. That's reminiscent of the TikTok generation. The generation that sees something fast that they can put this little circle around their picture and say, look at me, I'm helping, right? So this is very, very reminiscent of that. This shows how fast a trend can grow. Again, this is representative of professors having a bias on campus, and they push that onto their students. And this shows you how fast, in today's day and time, we don't have those slow growths of sympathy on campus that we used to before the internet. Now it's a very sharp spike, because it's not just the professors on these campuses that are seeing the coolness of the nice new shiny thing. It's also the students. And the professors want to appease those students and seem cool. So we're likely to see this same type of very sharp increase, and likely probably some very sharp fall off after that. Because again, that attention span has to be fed. As soon as you don't feed it fast enough, it's going to drop right back off again. Interestingly, I did a little bit more research to close here, and the hyper-politicization of higher education was one of the stories that I ran across, and this was very, very interesting. This was last published in 2023 and 2022, and it states higher education has recently made a hard left turn. 60%. 60% of faculty now identify as liberal or far left. This left-leaning supermajority is responsible for rampant discrimination against non-left job seekers, both conservatives and moderates, and the trend is likely to worsen. This chart right here shows you a similar thing. Now, this chart ended in 2014, but it still shows you that trend from 1989 to 2014. Look how much of the faculty was liberal in each one of these areas. I thought it was interesting that history and political science already had the highest amount of liberals in it, and it didn't have far to grow because it was already so far up there as it was. Again, that's history and political science. We know whoever writes the history writes it the way they want. So that's what I'm talking about bad information. These people are restructuring history to pass on to the students. That's why we have so many liberal dummies coming out of college these days. Look at this chart right here. Political self-identification of university faculty. The dotted line that you see, like the longer dash line, that's liberals. The solid line is conservatives. And the ... line, that's moderates in the middle. So you can see how high up, again, that's 60-something%. This was in 2015. 60-something% of the faculty across the board at universities was liberal, and only about 11 or 12% was conservative. This study by the independent.org concluded that it is not necessarily problematic for professors to all lean one way or the other politically, as long as they are committed to free and open inquiry, which we know they're not. Problems arise, however, when academics obfuscate and deny the reality surrounding the political ideology of university faculty. It is now a clear empirical fact that since the early 2000s, trends in faculty political identification have moved sharply leftward, yielding a 15 percentage point shift in as many years. The reason why I bring all this up is because, again, you guys know my focus is to try to deliver truth. I'm the truth pimp. And I want you to know that when you see things that don't line up with these same trends, or you see things that don't make sense, it's because the media is not giving you the truth. The media doesn't want you to know why these trends exist and what's behind them. I want you to know that. I want you to understand that there are forces working against us. Academia, universities, they are not the best place to send your kids. I'm not telling you not to send your kids to college. I'm telling you don't force your kids to college if it's not for them. The trades are bringing in much more money than them right now than these blue-haired basket weaving nut jobs out there. So if you could get somebody that knows how to fix a car, HVAC systems, plumbing, electricians. I know some of the nicest homes not far from my house here that are friends of mine who are electricians, who built their own business from the ground up and probably have no college. Yeah, they're book learned, but they're book learned through high school, then they learned a trade. I think that if children, and I'm not preaching here, you do what you want with your children, but I think that as responsible parents, we should let our children know that there are options out there, and we should also warn them, these colleges, they are going to try to brainwash you because they are very much left-leaning. So I think we should at least let our kids know, whether they're left-leaning or right-leaning, that your professors are not middle of the road. They're going to be far left-leaning. You are going to have to be strong in your convictions when you go there and stick to your belief system no matter what you're being taught, even if your grades suffer as a result of these people who disagree with your own ideology that you were raised with.